Well, as you've seen in the video, nothing can be ill if she be well. The point of the video was to show that sometimes in life, no matter how good things are going, no matter how well things are going for you, if people in your life are miserable, if they're suffering, if they're having issues, nothing can bring you comfort. In fact, sometimes you look for justice, you look for some sort of balance in the universe, you look for some way of bringing about some sort of stability or balance, because you see that a wrong injustice has been done and you want to bring about something that's going to balance that out or bring about some sort of resolution to that. And that's why I start with the Shakespeare quote, which is from Romeo and Juliet, which is, "For nothing can be ill if she be well." Indeed, nothing can be ill if she be well. Of course, the quote is referring to Romeo when he hears news of his beloved Juliet. And what he is suggesting is that no matter what's going on in his life, no matter what sort of adversity, what sort of challenges he's facing, if she is okay, if she is doing well, if everything is okay in her life, then it doesn't matter. As long as everything is good in her life, everything is going to be good in his life. And we are connected to other people, so nothing can be good if she be well. See, we identify happiness with the good life, not only with material wealth. Right? When we think of happiness, we think of having a really good job, lots of stuff. We have nice cars, we have a nice home, we have everything paid for, we have really good credit, all that sort of thing. That's what we think of when we think of happiness, material wealth. But also, and probably more, we think of how well things are going on around us, not just with our lives, but with everything in our community, our society, and more particularly with those we love, with those who are closest to us, people in our family, our friends, those people. With just a cursory look around the world, it's a mess. The world is a fucking mess. It's out of control and it's fucked. It's fucked up. So how can we find peace in such turmoil, especially when so many are suffering? It's a big question. How can we find peace in that? Well, one solution is to be angry, to try to find revenge. And as the video showed, that was his solution. To take revenge on those who had caused all the suffering in his life. Now, in our situation, not necessarily all of us, but most of us, who are we going to take it out on? On who? Who are we to take our revenge, our justice out on? The world? What are we going to do, destroy the world? It's God's creation. Are we going to take it out on God or on nature? Well, one solution is, and if there are any Satanists out there, don't take any offense to this. I'm talking about a more, traditional or classical form of Satanism, but there's Satanism. And we see that in rituals such as traditions of rituals such as the Necronomicon or the Order of the Nine Angels, ways of just destroying God's creation. Because God, like the Demiurge in Plato's works, The demiurge is the God who created the world, and he created it out of this sense of instinct. He had instincts. He didn't create it out of love. He created it just simply, could be out of boredom. He could have created it just to see that he could create it. But he didn't create it out of love, unlike what Christians would say. So there's a tendency to smother. We have instincts. We have instincts to protect. And if we're not going to take it out on the world, if we're not going to show revenge and anger and frustration over these challenges, what we want to do is protect those we love instead of before they get hurt. There's a tendency to smother. There's that motherly smothering that we overdo. It's overcompensation. And it's based on instinct, because we like to pull things close together, particularly, mothers and people with a motherly instinct. It has a lot to do with evolution, natural selection, instincts. It's to protect the progeny. It's to protect your offspring. That's the point of it, right? It has nothing to do with love, or at least what we understand love to be. It just has to do with just simply protecting your offspring so that you can have more offspring, and that's just an instinct you have, which you've evolved so that our species can survive. That's it. So the mother and her hens. But does she really care? Or is it just her instincts? You never know. You can't ever tell. So that won't work either, by just smothering those that we love. We can't take revenge out on the world because we don't know who to take revenge out on. We can't smother. We can't hold everyone close to us, right? So what I've identified are two ways of living. Two ways of living. We find that there are two approaches to life, and I've seen one regarded as kind of a, not really mental illness, but mental handicap, as you will, or a childlike perspective, whereas the other way of living is seen as the heart of intelligence and, oddly enough, wisdom or maturity. When we look at the stars, we are guided by something. We look up, and that's what we're guided by. We have the stars above. This is us walking, and we look up. Now, as a child, we like to look down, don't we? We don't look up at the stars. We look at what we're walking on. Now, if we do that, if we look at what we're walking on, we don't know where we're going. We say there's a path. But if we look at the stars and we look at the path, we see the path is shining. If we're looking at just our feet, well, we'll just go in circles, won't we? We'll just move around in circles. So we're not really going to get anywhere if we do that. So the one approach is to look at the stars. And the other one is just to look at our feet. Look at us inside, to look at ourselves first, right? See, we can see them, but we cannot grasp them, the stars. We can see the stars, but we can't touch them, right? So the closest thing to us are the things we can touch. However, the things around us at our feet are constantly changing, right? If I'm walking, there's a turf of grass, I'm looking at it, it suddenly changes to dirt, or changes to water, or some other surface. But the stars never change, right? They're always there in the same position. But the things under our feet are constantly changing. So obviously it seems more logical and rational to rely on the stars. But is that true? Is it always best to look at the stars? See, there's a suspicion that by looking inwardly, by looking at ourselves deeply, we find heaven. And above all, oddly enough, we find ourselves. We think of Abraham. I hate to bring up the Bible. A lot of you don't believe in the Bible. I think there's a lot of wisdom to be found in the Bible. We think of... We think of Abraham. And Abraham... Let me pass this. My phone is ringing. Abraham was called, we're told, by God. God's up here calling him. But the confusion oftentimes is that God is this outward source that's calling him, and he hears a voice, and it literally dictates to him. He's listening with his ear, right? And it literally dictates him what he needs to do. Okay, you need to go west, you need to do this, you need to do that. No, that's not at all what happened. It came from here, his heart. He heard it inside him. He heard it within him. He looked within him. He didn't look at the stars. He didn't look at the stars. He looked, I guess what you would call his feet. But he looked at himself. He looked inwardly first. And when you look at his life's not all that spectacular. I mean, he kind of went from one region of Palestine to the other, went to Egypt. Let's see, here's the, well, I can't draw the Middle East. I'm not going to try to draw the Middle East. But he basically just wandered around, really. He didn't really settle in one specific place. A much better example of this, I think, is found in the life of Moses. As we all know, Moses, supposedly had drawn his people out of Egypt, right? From the oppression of the Egyptians. Here's Moses. He's leading his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Well, when he led them, he had a specific place in mind. He knew that God was leading him someplace, right? But he never found it. He kept wandering around in the desert, in the wilderness. The Sinai Peninsula is kind of like the desert, the wilderness. Or, it's basically a place, there's not a lot there. And he just kept wandering around in circles. Well, that doesn't seem very productive. In fact, when we think of Moses, we don't think of someone who accomplished a great deal materially, on a material basis, but he accomplished a lot in terms of lifestyle, and that's looking inward. He followed his heart. When we follow our hearts, what happens is our lives don't really exhibit or express something that many people would really see as being significant or being, being something that is fruitful or something that is productive, right? But he did produce something, right? He produced something within his heart, and other people saw that. I remember I was watching a video, and it was a portion of a movie about Nietzsche, Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. I don't know if you're familiar with the philosopher, but basically in this scene, he's talking to a friend of his, and he's talking about, I guess, the good life or whatever. And I'll get her back later. He's talking about the good life, and his friend asks him, how he should live. Right, basically, I mean, that's not, verbatim what he said, but he asks him how he can live. Well, he mentions to him that that in order to build his family, in order to build those around him, he had to build himself first. And this seems very selfish, doesn't it? It seems very selfish, but not necessarily. We see Jesus doing that. We see a mixture of this with Jesus. Jesus was looking at the stars as well at times, but he was also looking within himself. There were many times when he was crowded in by people were crowding him in, and he would go off into the wilderness, and people thought that was very selfish of him. But he had to get away. And at times he almost seemed autistically introverted and awkward, right? And possibly mentally handicapped in some way. Some people might think that, but it wasn't, and not at all. This is the true basis of wisdom. He retreated from the crowds and went into solitude. And this seems selfish, as I said, but by building yourself, you build others. One has to be grounded first in real turf before one can follow the stars. One can not attempt to journey there if one is unaware of the materials around oneself. So if you don't know what's going on around you, and you got the stars, you're going to stumble and fall. There might be a hill here. There might be people going, you have all this stuff going on. If you're focusing on the stars, if you're focusing on these supposedly transcendent truths that stand outside and never change, then you're going to really miss out on a lot of things. And you're not going to really appropriately respond to this path that's laid out by the stars in the first place. Consider Icarus. He was so preoccupied looking up the sun. He wanted to go to the sun so badly because he saw this glorious sphere of fire. He wanted to go there so bad. But he failed to look around him to find the right sort of material to build his wings out of. Never thought of that, did you? We can oftentimes become so sensible we lose our senses and fail to see what is right in front of us just because these things seem to change so rapidly while the distant stars seem to stay still. So everything around us seems to be changing a lot, right? But if we look deeply within ourselves, she really wants to talk to me. If we really look deeply within ourselves, we'll find that the answers lie here, closest to us. As Aristotle said, just as light is to the bat's eyes, so too are the first principles to us. The most basic things, the most fundamental things are the things that we often miss. See, the journey of the stars can never be understood by the astronomer, but only by the thermometer. The warmth of blood, of true will and true desire, determination are what set the habits of the stars in motion, not some fixed set of laws that nature is a part of from the desires of God. I can never discern my Father's habits unless I go to know Him first, to understand why He does this or that, not how. So there are things within us that are right at our feet, the first things that we notice that are going to determine our paths in life. And we may look like we're going around in circles and this and that geographically on the outside, but on the inside we can cause great change, as Abraham did, as Moses did. Even though, from a cursory look, we see that he didn't really do much at all. He just kept going around in circles. So the causes of the heart are infinite, but the reasons are discernible by one simple act: communication. It's by communication. It's getting to know the heart, getting to know yourself, going deeply within. As Jesus said, heaven is within you. So you have to go within first. You have to look at your feet first. You have to be childlike. Look at the simple things first before you can look at the stars. Because the stars are just going to, you may think that they're leading you somewhere stable, and physically they might be, but they're not leading you anywhere personally. They're not changing you, not challenge you as a person. And that's the much deeper part. So, that's it for this episode of the Church of Desolation and our liturgy of, what do we call it? I just had this name up here. Hold on one sec. Yeah. Oh, the exoteric liturgy. That's what I'm calling it. So, Church of Desolation, and this is the exoteric liturgy. So this is episode 1. This is our first sermon, if you want to call it a sermon. As close as I can get. Well, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Say